Okay, you have a stone chumash in front of you. I don't know how this class will evolve, but for this week, we're doing Parshas Chayay. We're only going to do 2 or 3 Pesukim. We'll do it a little bit in depth, as best as we can. So, just first of all, a number of points to make. Chayay, to me, and just the basic pshat, basic simple understanding of the verses. It's the ultimate day after, not after the election, after the Akedah. Everything changed, and I just to demonstrate to you, this is such a vital question. Open your chumash, not to Chayay, but to the beginning of chapter 15, Perek Tesvav. Perek Tesvav, Pasuk Beis. So, before you read this, I just want to mention a few things. If you look at Bereshis up until now, there are a few commonalities, common denominators. By major tests, where was Noach after the ark rested? Where did the ark rest? It's not a trick question. On a mountain. When Lot came down from where with his daughters? He was up on a mountain. When Avram finished his Nisayon, where was he?
With his son.
But on a mountain. There seems to be this idea of coming back down, of landing after Nisayon. You know, in Daf Yomi we just had the very famous Gemara of Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Rabbi Lazar, who many believe is Rabbi Lazar HaKalir, who composed many of our piyutim, according to many opinions. I think Tosfos is one of those opinions. But in any event, they make this comment about the Romans, because the rabbis were praising the Romans, and we'll get to this pasuk that I asked you to look at in a second. The rabbis were praising the Romans, and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, what are you praising them for? For their bridges and tunnels and etc.? They only built that to tax us. And the Romans heard about this, and as to why he said that is a different discussion, but the Romans decided he has to be killed. So he hid in a cave for 12 years, and you always see this, the 12 years, always something repeated in the Talmud and the Chumash. 12 and 24, Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 students, 24,000. He went away from his wife for 12 years, then another 12 years, and Shimon Bar Yochai locked himself in a cave with his son for 12 years, then back for another 12 months. But in any event, when he comes back out of the cave, what happens? He starts destroying everything in sight. He couldn't stand the fact that Jews were working and earning a livelihood and not studying Torah all day. His remark was, would you give up eternal life for the sake of fleeting existence? Why would you do that? And God says to him, did I save you in order for you to be machriv ha'olam, to destroy the world? There seems to be always this problem of landing after these great moments, these great highs of spirituality, of dealing with human beings. Yeah, I'm not comparing, but parents, this is a very common complaint, and it's a positive complaint. Everybody should have this problem, but children coming back from Eretz Yisrael, spending a year there, and it takes them time to land and not to get on their parents' nerves and tell them how the house isn't kosher. I once saw a tshuva from Rav Pam, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Bracha. He was asked about a gartel. A child came home from yeshiva, and he decided that he's going to start wearing a gartel. Now, a gartel is a halacha. People think it's some stringency. It's in Shulchan Aruch under a different name. But in any event, the father wrote to Rav Pam, and he said, look, our custom is not to wear a gartel. Our kid comes home, and he says he has to wear a gartel. Who's right? And Rav Pam says, asur, it is forbidden for your son to do this. He cannot do this. And it's obviously each case has to be taken as it is. Chassidish family will be different, but in any event, so there is this idea of this again being a day after, of coming down from the mountain. My father once shared with me about Sir Edmund Hillary when he was the first to climb Mount Everest, and they asked him, this must have been so difficult to climb this mountain. He said the difficulty wasn't getting up the mountain, but it was coming back down. I don't think he was referencing this idea of coming down from a high, but it's a nice example. So in any event, I want to show you what I believe one of the great changes that happened. And this is very significant because I haven't seen anybody ask this question, and it's such an obvious question, and it's going to relate to our parsha. Avram tells HaKadosh Baruch Hu, first God says to him, if you look at the first pasuk in Perek 15, chapter Tesvav, Acher hadvar ma'elis is in Lech Lecha, hayadvar Hashem el Avram. There's a vision of God where he speaks to Abraham. Lamor saying the following, Al tira Avram, don't be fearful. Anochi magen lach, I will be a shield to you. Zecharcha harbe ma'od, you will have great reward. So Avram is somewhat incredulous, and he responds, Yemar Avram, Hashem Elokim, matitenli, what could you give me? Va'anochi holech hariri, I go childless. Uben meshek basi, the steward of my house, hu de meshek Elezer, he's Elezer. Vayomer Avram, and Avram continues, hein li lo nasata zera, I don't have children, he didn't give me children. Vihine ben basi yorishosi, the steward is going to control my house. He's going to be in charge of all my affairs. So Avram is here complaining about not having a child, excuse me, and being forced, as the Rishonim translate this verse, being forced to have the steward who's not has no relationship to him, which is Elazar, who was a tzaddik. But this is not the position Avram wanted to be in. He wanted his son, or a son, if he could just have a son, have the son take over this position and to be the steward of the house. If you look in our parsha, now we're not doing these psukim, but I just want to demonstrate how strange this is. Look in Perek Chaf Dalit, the beginning of chapter 24, in Parshas Chayay, the second chapter in Chayay. Va'avraham zakein, baba yamim. Avram was now getting on in years. He was elderly. V'Hashem beirach es Avram bakol. That's a very famous pasuk. What that means, if we have time, we'll explain later. Vayomer Avram, and Avram turns now, El Avdo Zakein Beso, HaMoshe B'chol Asherlo. He turns to Eliezer, who is in charge of his entire house, and he says, so hold on one second. Avram complains, and he says, God, how could you not give me a child? My steward Eliezer, he's not related to me, and he's in control of my house. If just you gave me a son, I'll put him in control of my house. God gives him a son. This is already, Yitzchak's already 40 years old at this time. Sarah's dead. So it's been a long time that Avram has come to the realization that he has a child. There's no time for growth. And yet here, at Yitzchak being 40 years old, Eliezer is still the steward of his house. What happened?
Because he didn't want a steward to run his house, or that he didn't want the steward to inherit that house?
Again, there are Rishonim who understand it that way. There are Rishonim who understand it both ways, but the idea of that he's in control of the house is a significant translation of those verses, according to many. And even if you understand it, however you understand it, it seems somewhat bizarre that at this stage, I mean, the basic question is, why didn't he send Yitzchak on this journey to find a wife? Why did he send Eliezer? But this complaint of not having a relationship, not having a son, and the steward having everything, and now he has the opportunity, and I just think that it's not a complete answer. I think the question is better than the answer I'm going to give, but to relate it to how we opened, this is when everything changed. For the first time, Avram, with a child, was able to realize a world without his son. He was about to kill Yitzchak. And on that journey, like any wise man or woman, prepared himself for this loss. Anybody who's had a loss and a sickness, and when it comes to you start subconsciously, consciously preparing yourself. And he was able to come to terms with the world without his son. And again, this doesn't really fully answer the question, but it brings us back to this idea of everything changing. And about the Benos Lot, I want to share with you something. I wasn't planning on telling you this. I don't know if you ever heard this before. I've told this to the men a few years ago, Friday night, and I want to share it with you about the Benos Lot, of everything changing. Because many people look at the daughters of Lot of doing a very bad thing, this incestuous act. Now, according to Rashi, when they were up on the mountain, they believed the world was destroyed. You know, it's like that. If I was the last person alive, would you marry me? That's really what was happening. And it, unfortunately, was the father. And unfortunately, even worse, they were wrong. Now, the Ramban disagrees, by the way. Not everybody...
The world was destroyed.
Their world. But the world existed. Right. They thought that they had to repopulate humanity. They thought they were Adam and Chava. Right. Now, there are other opinions. That's Rashi's view. There are other opinions that say that they did not think the world was destroyed. They had other reasons. But we have to remember that the Benos Lot, according to many, were not wicked people. So I want to share with you the story. In the 8th volume, and if you know the story, stop me, but in the 8th volume of the Igros Moshe, which was the posthumously published Tshuvos, response of Moshe Feinstein, there was a few months ago a 9th volume that was put out. So in the 8th volume, they wrote a beautiful biography of Moshe Feinstein and his wife. Really, really beautiful. And there are things in there that you won't find in any of the other biographies. I'll give you an example. When Rabbi Moshe Feinstein's granddaughter was by me for Shabbos 2 years ago, and she unfortunately passed. And this granddaughter was very close with Rabbi Moshe because her father, Shishkal, who was Rav Moshe's first son-in-law, died young, tragically. So she was really raised by her grandparents, and my mother-in-law, who was her best friend growing up, she was zocha to sit by Rav Moshe Feinstein's Shabbos table many, many times. So in any event, so I was telling her about this great biography about her grandfather, and I said, what really amazed me was that Rav Moshe Feinstein and his wife lost a child in Europe. I think his name was Chaya Pinchas. And she said, no, he didn't. I said, yes, he did. She says, no, he didn't. That's not. I never heard of such a thing. And I show her in the Sefer. She goes, that's not true. And she called me a few weeks later. She said, no, I actually made phone calls. He did. He just never talked about it, which I found just to be just amazing. Take what you want from that, but they just never spoke about it. But the story I wanted to share with you in it, relating to the Benos Lot, you should put on your seatbelts. Do you know the story? Put on your seatbelts. This is amazing. So Rav Moshe Feinstein was a very young man in his 20s when he was a Rav in Luban in Russia. And Parshas Vayera, there was an individual in the shul who became deathly ill, suddenly, Shabbos day. Into Motzei Shabbos, the community is going in to be with him and to say Tehillim and really to say their last words. Rav Moshe Feinstein walks in to visit him, and he says, okay, everybody out. And at this point, this disease, whatever it was, it almost sounds like an allergic reaction. His tongue started to swell, and he looked like he was going to choke to death. Lo aleinu. So everybody leaves, of course, and Rav Moshe Feinstein is left alone. And he says, Rabbi, I want to tell you what's going on. Friday night, I was learning the Parsha with my family, and I started making fun of the daughters of Lot. Because it's one thing that you believe the world is destroyed, and you're Adam and Chava, you're Noach, you have to repopulate the world. Nebuch, all you have as a male is your father, so you have an incestuous relationship. Fine. Why name your children Moab, which means from my father? Why name your child Ammon, Ammoni, my kinsman? Why did you go that far? Now, the truth is, Chazal actually speak about this, if this was an error on their part. But I went beyond what Chazal were saying. I made fun of them, and I used nivul peh, etc., etc. That night I had a dream. Just listen to this story. I'm just telling you what's written in the Igros Moshe. You could take what you want. I had a dream. 2 women dressed in white come to me in a dream. And they say, we are the Benos Lot. And we want to tell you that we heard what you said and how you talked in a derogatory fashion about us. And because your tongue spoke such evil and such lies, motzi shemra, untrue, negative talk about us, that tongue that spoke such, it will kill you. But because this question bothered you so much, we will share with you a secret. And now he turns to Rav Moshe. I want to tell you what the Benos Lot told me. Yeah. What did they tell him? There's a reason why we named our children Ammon and Moab. We were family with Avram. There were certain traditions that we had, nevuah about the future of the world. Torah was kept by Avram even before it was given. There was a profound sense of memories of days to come, of future ideas and ideals. And one of those will be future faiths that will stem wrongly from Judaism, because all 3 major religions believe, we could all agree on one thing, that the Jews received the Torah at Sinai. They hate to hear that, but it's true. Muslims, Christians, we could all agree with that. And we knew that there was going to be a breakout from Judaism. And at the heart of that will be this concept of immaculate conception. We didn't know when this was going to happen. And we didn't want it to start with us. Because if we came down from the mountain, the daughters of Lot, with a child, no one would believe it was these children were born from an incestuous relationship. We were afraid, rightly or wrongly, that they would say, no. This is an immaculate conceived child, and Christianity would start from us. So we bedafka, on purpose, named our children Me'av and Ammon. So I told you to put your seatbelts on. And I should just, a postscript to the story.
What happened to the guy?
What?
What happened?
He died. He died immediately afterwards. Now, I don't know how they knew the story. I imagine Moshe Feinstein or his wife told them the story because the children wrote the biography, the children and the grandchildren. And these are honorable people. But Ramnata Greenblatt, who's from the oldest students, American students of Moshe Feinstein, so he comes here often to write Gittin. And on one of his visits, I showed him this. And he almost threw the Sefer back at me. He said, "Lo haya v'lo nivrad." He said, Rav Moshe would run away from such stories. Now, I don't know if that, you can't really prove a negative, but that was his response. So anyway, so again, just back to this idea of coming down from a mountain. And one point that I should mention before we now, in earnest, read these few Pesukim that we're only going to have time for because we're going to learn them in depth, I want to share one other secret. You could put your seatbelts on, but just for a moment. It's not so shocking, but it's fascinating. We have Sarah dying. And we should point out, I'll be remiss if I don't mention, the women who die, the imahos, it's very mysterious. We don't know when Leah died. We don't know when Rivka died. There's no explicit verse. Rachel dies in a horrible manner based on something that Yaakov said, and you can only imagine the guilt Yaakov must have carried the rest of his life. And you have Sarah, whose main cause of death, which we'll discuss, the Medrash, its explanation, the various interpretations in the Midrashim, the Satan coming and telling her about the Akedah, it's also very mysterious. And I've pointed this out many times in other classes, that Miriam, there are three major sources of food and water and protection in the desert. They were Miriam. Because of Miriam we had the water. That's why after she died, the water stopped. Moshe and Aaron was the man and the nani hakavod, and they all stopped when they died. Now Moshe and Aaron, we know why they died. Because it's an amazing fact that they didn't get to enter Israel. And we need to know why. So there's a sin. There's a whole chapter, the Mei Meriva. Miriam dies, and there's no comment as to why. I've spent 10 years of Parshas Chukas researching this. Nobody asks the question. Just a simple question. All the women, by the way, none of the women died in the desert. They all merited to enter Israel. Except for one, Miriam. And we don't know why. Nobody has been able to show me a source. Now, I have 5 answers that, talking to people, coming up with ideas, it's not the time to go into Parshas Chukas, perhaps why, but again, it's just very interesting. I found a Chizkuni on this week's Parsha, which actually alludes to this idea as to why by women it's somewhat mysterious, but we don't have time to go into, and it's a complicated idea that Chizkuni says to do with tznius, etc. But in any event, something to pay attention to. Okay, so without further ado, I wanted to say something else. I was going somewhere. I don't remember what it was, but let's go on. Let's read the Parsha. So you have the place, I hope. Oh, that's what I want to tell you. That little small seatbelt. The Parsha opens up with Sarah's death, we're about to see. And it continues with Abraham, Avram, seeking to find a burial spot for Sarah. And in between, we have a statement that Avram was maspid. He gave a eulogy for Sarah, one of the first sources for eulogizing. And there are many halachos, in fact, that some of the commentators want to derive from here. But we don't have his eulogy. Wouldn't you want to know what Avram said? Do you know that you know what Avram said? Do you know that you've said the eulogy of Avram? And you probably said it within a matter of days? According to Chazal, Eishes Chayil was initially composed by Avram. And isn't it interesting that we have the custom by a woman's funeral, many rabbis, to go through Eishes Chayil and to discuss the person who died in the drushas of the Chassam Sofer when his wife died, and who was married 3 times. He had wives who died. But I think this was his first wife. He also went through Eishes Chayil. Nothing to do with the parsha. I've never shared this before, but in the Drush of Chassam Sofer, there's a footnote that when his wife, before she died, she hid a letter for her husband that he should find when he does Bedikas Chametz the coming year. It actually said what the letter said. She apologized to him for taking him away from his learning, and someone so holy should be married to someone like her. Clearly, she was a very holy individual. But in any event, that was his hesped. So when you say Eishes Chayil, it's something to keep in mind.
There are sources that say that?
Yes. Now, don't ask me tonight where the sources are. Something that I've seen years ago. I've looked around tonight. I've seen it tonight brought down b'shem midrashim, but without a direct source. Maybe next week we'll begin, if you remind me, with that exact source. Okay. We don't want these classes to last more than 40 minutes, so let's begin and study the parsha. Vayihu Chayay Sarah. Now, let's just start at the first word. Vayihu. 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 It's not a very common opening word. We do find it. The Balaturim, I believe, Balaturim, maybe others, point out something very interesting. The numerical value of that word, 5 seconds to figure it out. Who can figure it? No, it's 37.
Yeah, 37.
What's 37? Doesn't mean
More than
anything.
36, which is too high.
Much better.
Oh.
How old was Sarah when Yitzchak was born? 90. How old was he when she died? 127. 37-year difference. Everything she pined for, her life as a mother began that moment. And again, that's the point of this class. We're not going to discuss homiletics. We really want to get into, reveal some basic pshat, such beautiful ideas of this divine Torah that we have. So many secrets contained in each and every word. So let's continue. Vayihu Chayay Sarah Mea Shana, one of the most famous Pesukim in all of Bereshis. 100 years, Ve'esrim Shana, and 20 years, Ve'sheva Shanim, and 7 years, Shnei, the years, Chayay, the life, actually literally it means the lives of Sarah. There are a lot of words that allude to plural, Shemayim, Mayim, Chayim, this idea of duality, but we're not going to go into that right now. But in any event, this is a very famous pasuk because of the seeming redundancy in the pasuk and the Rashi, based on the Medrash. So look at Rashi. So Rashi says, "Lekach nichdaf shana b'chol klal uklal." This is why it writes shana over and over again, 27, 100. Now, Rashi's clearly bothered by this. This is why he's commenting. He doesn't mention every medrash. He's mentioning this one because it bothers him, the pshat, the simple meaning of the verse. Why is it being redundant? So, shekol echad, lomer lecha, I missed that word, to tell you, shekol echad, that each one of these categories, nidrash le'atzmo, is expounded individually. Bas meya kibas esrim. She was 100 years old, like she was like a 20-year-old. When she was 100 years old, she was like a 20-year-old lechet when it comes to sin. Ma bes bas esrim lo chata, just like a 20-year-old has no sin. Shari eina bas onshim, we'll explain this in a moment. Af bas meya, so too Sarah when she was 100 years old, below chet, she was without sin. Ubas esrim, when she was 20, kibas sheva, she was like a 7-year-old leyofi when it came to beauty. Now, let's stop here for a moment and discuss a few things. First of all, there is a concept in Judaism that you are not a bar onshim. Whether you are a woman or a male, it doesn't make a difference until you're 20 years old. You don't get divine punishment until you're 20. There are a few problems with this Rashi because Rashi, and really with this Medrash, we don't have time. I didn't realize how fast time will go, but there's a Rashi in Perek Hey, Pasuk 32, that says that up until the giving of the Torah, you became culpable for divine punishments at the age of 100. Here Rashi is saying 20. It wasn't until the Torah was given.
Maybe that stopped after when people stopped living so long.
But I had a similar idea. I mean, there's a medrash that says, why did God shorten the lifetimes of people so dramatically? The medrash says because if you live 900 years, you would hit that snooze button on self-improvement over and over, and that's what was happening. When time is limited, so when time was limited, perhaps, I like your idea very much, I had a similar thought. There are others who argue that Matan Torah doesn't mean the giving of Sinai revelation, but it could refer to the 2,000 years of Torah, which began by whom? By Abraham. Because we do find this strange dichotomy of the Torah being given at Sinai, the Jews becoming a nation at Sinai, and Abraham wasn't a Jew, but the Ramban says he was a Jew. Did he keep the Torah? The Talmud says yes, but then all these events seem to happen that counter that idea. So there is this idea that the Torah began with Sarah and with Avram. Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky in an earlier parsha actually says all the debates between Abraham and Sarah, at the core of them all was, are they Jews yet? Sarah taking one side, Abraham taking another side. It's a very lengthy Emes Yaakov, but a beautiful one. Emes Yaakov, he's amazing, everything he says. A few other questions on this parsha, on this Rashi. The idea of a 20-year-old is interesting. Do you know the Medrash says, now, obviously when I'm going to ask the question, you're going to know the answer. Adam and Eve were not created as infants. So how old were they at creation? They were 20. According to one Medrash, they were 20. There are other Midrashim, but they were 20. So this idea of being a 20-year-old from sin, because at that moment they were completely free from sin. So within every Medrash is a lot of Kabbalistic ideas as well as Pshat ideas. But now for some very basic questions. You don't need to know anything for this question. And if this is somewhat uncomfortable, but I think it's an obvious point, when you describe beauty, you usually don't point to a 7-year-old, you would quicker point to a 20-year-old. speaking about the beauty of women. And this is a question that is asked by many. Why would we say when she was 20, she was as beautiful as a 7-year-old? Right, so Rabbi Moshe Feinstein says a similar idea. He says that we weren't talking about a beauty that could lead someone astray. We're talking a beauty of innocence. And no matter how liberal someone is, how anti-censorship someone is, in their homes they guard that television and that computer like a fox because they understand there's an innocence of children that you don't want to be taken away. But a very interesting Rashi. We should point out a big problem. There are many people, when they die, that the Torah separates each year. You know who's one of them? Yishmael. When Yishmael dies, it divides the years, Shana, 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 3 times. When Avram dies, it divides the years, Shana, Shana, Shana. So what's bothering the Medrash? And what's bothering Rashi? Now the truth is, by Avram, he actually does the same thing. But by Yishmael, he doesn't. How could he? Yishmael only did teshuvah at the end of his life. You can't say at each stage was as equal in holiness and beauty as the last. So the Ramban, for this reason, completely rejects Rashi. And he's not rejecting the Medrash, but he says what was bothering the Medrash was not the division of 3, because that you find by people like Yishmael. What bothered him was the last 3 words of the pasuk. Shnei Chayay Sarah. That was not needed, because how did the pasuk begin? These were the lives of Sarah. So that's already stated. And then you have the years divided in 3. The 4th time to say years indicates that everything preceding it is a common thread. That's the Ramban's view, and many others seek to support Rashi, because these are very strong questions on Rashi's reading of this Medrash. You can see the Medrash inside and judge for yourself. But in any event, that's point number 3 or 4 on this Rashi. Another point on this Rashi is a very famous Medrash. I'm going to read to you the Medrash inside. I'm very disappointed how fast time is going. I'm not going to be able to get to half of the material, but I'm going to read this Medrash to you. Again, this is a very... Well, yes, go ahead.
The Ramban says the Medrash is not bothered by the division to 3, but is bothered by the words Shnei Chayay Sarah, and then the Ramban... I missed, you said something...
Well, he bases the idea. What's unique about the pasuk is not the division of 3. It's the repetition at the end of Shnei Chayay Sarah, which indicates that everything preceding it is aligned by one common thread, and then you could go ahead and darshan it. Okay, so we should point out a beautiful idea, and really this class isn't for beautiful ideas in the sense, beautiful ideas for the brain, not for the heart, but one for the heart, which is from the Emes Liyaakov, again, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, one of his most famous ideas on this pasuk. He says the repetition is for a very simple reason. How did Sarah die? Satan, right? The Satan, right, came to her and told her about that kid, and she died. It's very common for people who suffer a loss to start finding reasons. If it wasn't for that doctor, if it wasn't for that mistake, if they could have caught it earlier, they would have lived longer. What the pasuk reminds us is there's a God in this world. Everybody has their time. And you shouldn't say if just the Satan would not have come, Sarah would have lived. If it wouldn't have been the Satan, it would have been something else. It would have been something else. So 127... and it begins, these are the years of Sarah, and this is all it could have been. That's how you read the end of the pasuk. It couldn't have been anymore. No matter what would have happened, or what didn't, or what wouldn't have happened, that these were the lives of Sarah. So the Medrash, the very famous Medrash, this is in Bereshis Rabbah, Parsha Nun Ches 58, Os Gimel. Rabbi Akiva Haya Yoshe B'Darish. Rabbi Akiva is sitting and he's teaching a class in Torah, very famous Medrash for Hatzibur Misnamneim, and people are dozing off, which maybe you are. Bikesh La'oron, and he wanted to say something to wake them up. So this is a segula now that I know everybody's going to pay attention, because when Rabbi Akiva had a problem, people falling asleep, he would read this. What did he say? Amar Marosa Esther Shetimlach al Sheva ve'Esther Mumea Medina. If you look in the Megillah, Esther ran 127 kingdoms. How did that come to be? So he said, Ella Tevo Esther Shahaisa Bas Pita Shel Sarah Shechaisa Kuf V'Chaf V'Zayin. Sarah was a great granddaughter of Sarah. Sarah lived these beautiful 127 years. So too, Esther got these 127 kingdoms. So there's a number of questions. It's such a famous Medrash. We have to point out the obvious questions. You have students falling asleep. Of all amazing things to tell them, this is something that's going to galvanize them. Why was this so special? So we have to also remember that this was at a time of Roman persecution, and many commentators point this out, and to remind them of Esther's sacrifice, because Esther could have backed out of all of this. She didn't need this, and she was actually very frightened, and she had to give up a lot, and Sarah had to give up a lot. But Reb Tzadok, the amazing Reb Tzadok HaKohen, the great Rebbe of Europe, one of the great thinkers in Jewish philosophy, Machshava and Chasidus, he asks another question. He asks, how could you fall asleep in Rabbi Akiva's class? Such an interesting question. You falling asleep in Rabbi Akiva's class? How is that possible? So he says that, again, remembering when this was happening, and we always find in Chazal these references to how difficult Rabbi Akiva's classes were. Who famously didn't understand the teachings of Rabbi Akiva? Moshe Rabbeinu, right. The Gemara Menachos tells us that Moshe Rabbeinu went around to see the Torah being studied throughout the ages, new ideas, new insights. I mean, he may be here right now. This may have been one of the moments at Sinai that Moshe was sent to. I assure you, if he doesn't understand what we're saying, it's because what we're saying is wrong. But that wasn't the case with Rabbi Akiva. And he actually says to God, why did you give it to me? You could have given it to him. And Reb Tzadok is the one who gives the famous answer. We're not going to go into Reb Tzadok's explanation there. But they started to feel that they were worthless, that they can't do anything, that they can't be perfect like their Rebbe. And he was trying to show them that anybody could be anything. I would just say simply that when we read the Torah, my simple explanation to this Rabbi Akiva Medrash is, when you read the Torah, if you remember when Avram is blessed with future generations of children, that's you. That this Bible that's studied by Christians and Muslims and all other faiths, it's you. It's mamish you. It's not, proverbially you. It's not as a mushal. It's you. And what Rabbi Akiva was telling them is, a way to galvanize them is, look what happens. Sarah does something thousands of years ago, and then Esther comes along and reaps the benefits. You're a part of that story. And especially at the time of the Roman decrees against the study of Torah, this was a vital message. So I'm going to run through a few things very quickly because I want to get to something. So the next Rashi is Shnei Chayay Sora. Then Rashi after that is Kiryat Arba. We should make a point. Rashi understands Kiryat Arba literally. It's expressive, meaning a city of four. And Rashi gives two explanations from the Medrash of what four of what. The Medrash actually, ironically, gives four explanations for and so on. By the way, this idea that only four partners are buried in Maras Machpelah is disputed. By Sefer HaTemuna, I've seen the Shari bring this down. Do you know there's a view of another couple that is buried in Maras Machpelah? Again, put your seatbelts on. You know who that was?
Ruth and Boaz?
Nope. Moshe and Sipporah.
I was going to guess that, and I thought,
Moshe, who were told that the kever will not be known. Yeah, you could ask all your questions.
buries him.
Yeah, Rabbi Shalom buries him. Yeah.
Not in Eretz Yisrael.
These are all great questions. And again, I every year I find this in a sefer, and I mark it, and I can never remember the sefer to find where that mark is. But the last time I saw it was in the Shari Aaron. I remember it was somewhere in Devarim. So hopefully I'll find it one day. But in any event,
Probably with the advanced techniques they have for ascertaining those things, couldn't that be scientifically looked at or proven at Mars and
so the question being, why don't we actually investigate Maras Machpelah, go down? Well,
I don't know.
the religions.
I'd like to believe it.
Well, I'll tell you a little bit of history. Moshe Dayan tried this. It has been tried over the history. Now, the Arabs won't allow it. The Jews won't allow it. But it has been done. The last visit was in 1981. Shaviz, I think, was the professor's name who did it. I think it was Moshe Dayan. The first story, if I remember correctly, he sent a girl down. Her name was Michael. You could, if you have the magazine, the Biblical Archaeological Review, Harvey Shanks. It's in other. I'm sure you could Google it and find out more information. And I wasn't prepared for this question, but just for memory, he sent down. She was a very thin girl, and he sent her down in with a rope. And all she saw was all these stairwells and hidden chambers, and she's completely lost. The 1981 story ends that he found a second chamber, and there was some pottery and an old bottle of wine. But again, it was, when I say old, I mean from antiquity. But there was no way to, again, if you're caught, you'll be killed. I mean, the Arabs will never allow you to go down there. They believe others are buried there. There are all these interesting stairwells. There's evidence of Christian missionaries in the 11th, 12th century trying to get down. So you're obviously not the first one to ask this. It's a great question. I would advise you to Google it because there is a lot of fabulous information about this. So I just want to share with you about this Rashi. There is another view, and Ibn Ezra takes this view. And in fact, in Sefer Yehoshua, chapter Tesvav, Pasuk Yud Gimel, it's not called Kiryas Abba. In fact, if you have a stone chumash in front of you, open up in Bereshis itself. Look at chapter Lamed Hey, Pasuk Chav Zayin. In chapter Lamed Hey, Pasuk Chav Zayin, I'm stalling because I'm trying to get to the Pasuk quickly. It says a little bit different. Vayavo Yaakov el Yitzchak Aviv, Mamre, in Mamre, Kiryat Ha-Arba. That Arba is a noun. And in Yoshua, there was one of the giants' name was Arba. One of the former kings' name was Arba. And then Ibn Ezra says that's what it doesn't mean four of something. And Ibn Ezra has no problem arguing with the Medrash. He's not saying the Medrash is wrong. He's saying it's not pshat. It's not simple meaning. The simple translation is the city of a man named Arba. Okay, so, I want to finish the second pasuk. So we're not going to have time to do more than the second pasuk. So let's just read the pasuk together. V'Tomas Sarah b'Kiryas Arba, he Chevron. Chevron had many names. Be'eretz Canaan, which was in Canaan, Israel. V'yavo Avraham lispod l'Sarah v'livkosa. So Rashi, we don't have time to see it inside. Rashi here tells us, hey, why is the death of Sarah right next to the Akedah? And Rashi tells us the famous answer that Sultan came, tells Sarah about the Akedah, she dies. So a few asides. I want to just bombard you now with questions on this Rashi and on this Medrash. Why did Rashi wait till now to tell us this? Typically, when Rashi asks, why is this parsha next to the one before it, it's the first Rashi in the parsha. Sarah dies. Lama nismacha misas Sarah imenu. He could have asked it right away. Why does he wait till here? Now, truth be told, the Medrash also seems to wait till later. In the Medrash Rabbah, it's almost a tangential, it's a side point. Parenthetically, they throw in this idea. It's not even in the Medrash Rabbah, really. You have to look in other books, Pirkei Rebbe Elazar, Tanchuma. But that's question number one you could think about. Another question. Where was Yitzchak all of this time? Vayava Avram? Vayava Avram lispel l'Sarah? There was a child here who lost his mother. Where is he? Aside, everybody focuses on where was he by Rivka. Why didn't Avram send Yitzchak? Why did he send Eliezer? Ask it better. Ask it here in the opening of the parsha. He disappeared before we talk about him, by the death of his mother. Can't you kick yourself for never thinking of that question? Well, I kicked myself because I never thought of that question. So I looked around tonight because it was the first time I had this question, and if I had it before, I forgot. And boy, did I find something. And again, I would ask you to put on your seatbelts. I found this in the Shari Aaron, my favorite sefer on Chumash. In the Shari Aaron, I'm going to read it to you. Okay, this is on page 1027. The Shari Aaron this is just on two parshios. He goes pasuk by pasuk. He really tells you that he bases it. He's still alive. He's a Holocaust survivor. Lives in Bnei Brak, a big Talmud Chacham. He's doing this now on Shulchan Aruch. In any event, so he asked the question: V'yesh lishol Yitzchak heichan haya. So Rabbi Chayay he brings down. Others he brings down. V'yesh mefarshim. This is from the Mincha Belula and the Shach. V'yesh mefarshim. There are those commentators. D'mikan raya l'mashakasa b'Zohar HaKadosh. This is a proof to that which the Zohar says. Well, what does the Zohar say? Sheshachat ba'Avram rov shiniyim, v'holichu hamalachim teikaf l'gan Eden l'refuasa. The Akedah actually happened. He sliced Yitzchak, and angels had to take Yitzchak to Gan Eden to heal him. V'nisha sham gimel shanim, and he resided there for 3 years. Uberach halo baruch ata Hashem b'chayei mesim, and that's where the blessing b'chayei mesim comes from.
This is really hard.
Well, tell your friends they can come to the class next week.
Yes.
We're just getting started, but we have a lot more questions to ask. It's 8:25, so we could stop here. I could go for 5 more minutes.
5 more.
No one's going to say no if I ask that. I should have just stopped. Okay.
Good.
A few more issues. Why is it that Satan is allowed to do this? Why is it that the Satan is allowed to kill people? Okay, you want to say not kill people. Is allowed to deceive people. And this is not the first time this happens. Forgetting Iyuv for a second, which is its own Pandora's box of hashkafic questions, important questions, in the Gemara's Bava Basra, the beginning of Bava Basra. Forgetting that for a moment. Just focus on the following 2 facts I want to share with you. We have here Satan, depending on which medrash, lying. Not just lying, he dressed up as Yitzchak, according to one medrash. He dressed up as Yitzchak. There's another time this happens, causing major destruction. When the Jews thought Moshe was late, he created an illusion. It was a lie. He didn't just make up a story. He actually fooled us with our eyes, questioning what we see, saying, here's the casket of Moshe. Moshe's dead. And that's why they needed this other conduit to God. They created the Egel Hazav. Why is he allowed to do that? It's unclear. So, I don't know how much time we have, so I'll share with you a few insights about what the role of the Sultan is, how he was able to do this, what precisely happened here. According to the Seder Olam, I had an idea for a number of years, and this year, for the first time, I saw something, and I want to share that something with you first, and then tell you an original idea, which may be true, maybe not, but it's something. Food for thought. Give me a moment till I find it inside. Okay, so it goes like, it's Midrash HaGadol. I have to correct myself a 3rd time, and the Pirkei Rabbi Elazar. Those are the 2. Forget everything I said. It's the Pirkei Rabbi Elazar. As I mentioned, there are 4 or 5 sources. So this is the Pirkei Rabbi Elazar's version. Rav Meir Zlotowitz's translation. Satan was frustrated at his inability to dissuade Avram and Yitzchak from heeding God's command. He thereupon went to Sarah and said, Alas, Sarah, have you not heard what has happened? No, she replied. Your husband took Yitzchak, slaughtered him, and offered him up as a sacrifice on the altar. The boy wept. Satan continued, but there was no one to save him. Hearing this, Sarah bursts into a fit of wailing crying, aloud 3 times like the 3 sustained notes of the shofar. She sobbed trua and a tekiah, then she died. Now, why to me is this medrash so significant? Because a couple of years ago I noticed something. If you look at Rashi, when Satan comes down and fools us that Moshe was dead, it says, Uma'arer esa olam. He was ma'arer the world, confused the world. When Chazal tell us to blow shofar twice, what's their language? Ma'arer ha-Satan. So I figured this must be midah keneged midah. Measure for measure. You confuse us, we'll get back at you. And every year we get back at him. But I never was able to answer one question. Why shofar? Why do we pay him back by the shofar? And then this year I'd see this medrash that she made the wailings, which shofar is all about the sounds of tears. So what do we have here? We have 2 famous midrashim of Satan causing serious effect onto the world. By Moshe Rabbeinu, he caused the great chet of the Egel Hazav, convincing us that Moshe was dead, causing us to do this Aveira, in fact, gifting us, in a sense, with Yom Kippur, because that's when we were gifted with Yom Kippur, when we received our quasi-repentance, our slicha mechila. And we should point out, there is a debate when Yom Kippur was created, if it was always to be in existence from Maisa Bereshis, which Bereshis Rabbah implies, or if it was born from the Chet HaEgel, which one can infer from Rashi. There's another Rashi in Micha that says the opposite. This is a difficult topic. I once gave a Shabbat Shuvah drasha just on this. But in any event, so what do we have? We have Sarah Imenu being fooled by the Satan, Klal Yisrael being fooled by the Satan. The Lashon used is la'arer, to confuse. The Gemara Shoshana tells us, although all we are commanded to do are 3 sets of blasts, we do 6 sets. We double down. And we do this in order to la'arer, the same lashon, the same language to confuse the Satan. And now with this medrash, I can support this idea. Why do we choose the shofar to get back at the Satan, kaviyachal as it were? Because the Satan caused these tears of sorrow. And the Gemara tells us, let's just finish this point, caused the tears of sorrow, which the medrash says is compared to a shofar sound, so we get back at him by the shofar. And the Gemara tells us, by the way, this is nothing new, in that, in fact, the sound of a trua, which we're not sure what it is, the Gemara says, if it's what we call a shever, or if it's what we call a trua, it defines it as a yavava, it defines it as different types of crying, of tears. Just without this medrash, that's the whole idea behind Tkiyah Shofar. So in any event, let's just quickly end with a few other points on this same Rashi and the idea of a Satan. Continuing, I'm going to read again from a translation from Rabbi Zlotowitz. This is the Art Scroll 2-volume masterpiece on Bereshis. My understanding is it took Rabbi Zlotowitz 7 years to write. It's one of the best svarim just to accumulate the various pashtonim and darshanim through the ages, what they've spoken on each and every pasuk. It's one of the best out there in any language. If you're looking to get a recap of the premier ideas, the paradigm of the Pesukim. In any event, so on page 865, he brings down another version of this. And I'm going to read it. According to the Sefer HaYashar, when Satan informed Sarah what had happened, Sarah threw herself on the ground, cast ashes on her head, and sobbed. Oh, my son Yitzchak, I wish I would have died today in your stead. I would first bore you I who first bore you at 90 now mourn over you, but I console myself. And she continues reading. Oh Hashem, you are just. While my eyes weep bitterly, my heart rejoices. And she wanders about inquiring of everyone that she encounters as to the whereabouts of her husband and her son. She sent some servants to the academy of Shem ve'ever, and she herself went to Hebron, but no one could verify what had happened to her son. Now listen closely. The Medrash continues, again as translated from the Sefer Yashar by Rabbi Zlotowitz. Sarah was delirious. Suddenly, Satan reappears to her in the guise of an old man and said, I lied to you. Avram did not kill his son, and he is not dead. When Sarah heard this, she was so elated that her son was still alive, continues the Medrash, that her soul departed through joy. Now, the reason why I'm quoting this Medrash, it's fascinating to read the various accounts. We're not going to read all the Midrashim. But it seems to me that this explains something that happens much later in Sefer Bereshis. Because now we see that Yitzchak being alive, finding out that a child is alive when you thought him to be dead, could cause someone shock and death. And this may be why we were so careful, Bas Asher, to sing slowly to Yaakov to let him know that Yosef was alive, because Yaakov Avinu was aware, and the Shvatim were aware that their great-grandmother passed away, Sarah, through the shock, as the Sefer HaYashar's version of the story is, not that Yitzchak was dead, but that Yitzchak was alive. The last point, two more points that we'll end with. We asked this question: how is Satan allowed to do this? And this is a deep question. We don't really have time. I am not prepared, nor am I the person who should be explaining such lofty concepts. But I will share with you something the Shari Aaron brings down. And I want to quote a little bit from the Shari Aaron. V'hine, this is page 1024 in the second column. V'hine al hamaymer hazeh, quoting from this Perkei de Rebbe Lazar, tzrichin hisbonin heitev. We have to really try to figure this out. Shilechora hu kasha ma'od. This is very difficult. After all, Satan is a creation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, under Hashem's control. And there are other faiths who took this idea of a Satan and ran with it and manipulated it and turned it into something which is what it is not. Of course, I've said the story before, that when I used to work in the prisons and the priest and the imam would always try to schmooze with me. This line always made me laugh when the priest, I was explaining to him that I can't come in on Friday or Saturday. So he says, oh yes, that's right, Jews also have a Sabbath. As if, they had this idea and then we took it from them. Everything that they have, the famous ideas that they have some relation to Yiddishkeit that they have taken and destroyed. Mashiach, Messiah, that it being a divine character. We don't have to get into a theological discussion, but we all know what we're referring to. In any event, but we believe, the Shayay says, that the Satan is a shliach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'hu gavra l'tachlis brias ha'adam. He is an individual, an entity that serves a purpose, a divine purpose, to the creation of man. Shal yado izaka ha'adam l'chayim ha'netzchayim. Man, through the challenges of the Satan, can gift himself with eternal life. And the whole purpose, sheyazes also la'avor al Torah mitzvah. And how does this come to be? Because the Satan's job, his holy job, is to try to test us, to try to challenge us, and we're supposed to overcome those challenges, and through that we have merit. So what's going on here? That he seems to be doing something which is evil, which is wrong, which is not the ratzon of Hashem. Ma ratza hasatan min sara acher ma'isa akeda. So Shayay is saying, look, I understand before the akeda happened. We have midrashim that the Satan tried to stop, delay, trouble, pain Avram so that he shouldn't continue with this mission. And that's a test. That's the Satan's job. But once the Maisa happened, once the Akedah happened, if it's divine creation, the Satan, there's nothing for him to do. He lost, which really means he won. The Shayay implies that the Satan really wants us to beat him. So again, the Satan has a right to challenge us before an event, before a mitzvah or Aveira is performed, but after, he has no job. And that's what makes this question that we asked, and that the Shayay is asking in a much better way, much more grounded way. Why was he allowed to do anything after the Akedah? And he brings down a very lengthy discussion, interpretation from the Kilas Yitzchak. And just briefly, based on this and other interpretations that I've seen, it would go something like this. We understand that there's a concept called tshuva. And repentance means that we could be mischaret, we could have regret on prior actions. And that regret, coupled with other ingredients, can erase prior evil deeds and at times even turn them into schuyos, into merits. It can completely manipulate past deeds. It's a wonderful time machine. Now, the Gemara in Kedushin tells us that not only does teshuvah have the power to turn bad deeds into good, to erase bad deeds, but it also has the negative power of taking good deeds and erasing them. If someone has charata of a life well lived, of Torah mitzvahs, of kveitim l'Torah, and at the end of their life they have regret of all the averos they could have done, of the more materialistic life they could have led, if they wouldn't have led a life of Torah. If, unfortunately, lo aleinu, they have this true charata, they can lose it all. And of course, Rabbi Chanan famously asks to the Chafetz Chaim, one of the most famous letters back and forth, that if the Mesilas Yesharim is correct, and if our assumptions are correct, that Teshuvah is Midas Harachmim, meaning when you do a judge in a secular court is not, he may lessen the sentence, but he's not going to completely erase the deed because someone is regretful and mournful. So the fact that Hashem does this is not justice, but rachmim, but mercy. But if it's mercy, says Rabbi Chanan, how could it work the other way? How could it take away good deeds? But I'm sorry to throw in these questions. We're not going to answer that question, but something to think about. Many speak about this, and again, this is also a topic that we've discussed in Shabbos Shuvah. But this point, says the Shayay, says the Kilas Yitzchak, say others as well, is the key here. If the Satan failed to have Avram, to stop Avram from performing the Akedah, the next step is having Avram be mischaret, having Avram have regret of the Akedah, of coming home to a wife who is nifteris, and saying to himself, Gewalt, why did I go through with this nisayon? And that was the goal of the Satan. And that's why, although still difficult, it was in his province, in the job description of the Satan, even after the Akedah, to do something to affect, in his hope, to affect charata, regret, in the heart of Avram. Now, how Satan should be allowed to kill somebody or to cause begrama to kill somebody, we find this by Eov as well, in the book of Job, this idea of Satan being able to kill. And this is something that I don't understand, and we'll have to leave that as a question. And just we'll end now with a nice idea, not a question. The Pasuk tells us Pasuk 3. We're only doing 2 Pesukim, but we'll read the beginning of the 3rd Pasuk. Once we're reading a Pasuk, we should complete it. So we'll read the whole Pasuk. V'yakam Avraham me'al pnei Mesa. Avram rises up from upon the presence of the Nefteres, his wife Sarah Imenu. V'aydaber el bnei Ches lemor, and he spoke to the children of Chayay. So I just want to point out an interesting phrase, Vayakam Avram, getting up from where? And the Abarvanel and others speak about this, but the Abarvanel says because his head was bowed, he was crying. And this was the moment that he had to take care of things. He had to stand up. And I think there's a deeper message here. The beginning of Eicha, the first few Pesukim, I was always troubled by what seems as if the Navi is waxing poetic, where he says Yerushalayim is crying v'dimosa alechia, and her tears, the Jerusalem tears of this of Yerushalayim, the city, v'dimosa alechia, the tears are falling on her cheek. And this seems strange. Why does the pasuk have to tell us where the tears are crying or the tears are falling? We know where tears fall. Just say she's crying. And I think the MS might be that there are 2 types of people who cry. There are those who cry and have their head down. And when you give up, when you think there's nothing worth living for, and when your head is down, when you have yiush, your tears fall to the floor. But Klal Yisrael is told that even in the worst of times, we have to get up. V'yakam Avram me'al pnei Meso. His head was down, his tears were not falling on his cheek, his tears were falling on the floor. But he knew he had to move on. Not forgetting about the loved ones who've passed, but he knew he had to move on, and he picks his head up, and his tears fell on his cheek. Okay, so this is the first class on the parsha that we just completed. We only did 2 Pesukim. We obviously we're going to continue every week. Various women had various ideas and suggestions. I ask you to consider what we did today. If you want to, in future weeks, go through the entire parsha and just have select ideas throughout the aliyos, we can do that. If you want to continue just doing a couple of psukim, please let me know. And let me end with a request for donations. Hurricane Sandy, Baruch Hashem, Buffalo was not hit, but communities were. And National Council of Young Israel called me the other day asking if I could make an appeal. And I really want to send him a nice, healthy check to help the various Young Israels and Bichlal, Klal Yisrael, all the people who are suffering without electricity and water. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bench us not to suffer from such storms again in the future. All those who are in harm's way should be safe and secure. And Bilam Avos Lanetzach. Mashiach shall come, Thank you for coming tonight.